The US economy shrank in the first quarter of 2025, and one more negative quarter, and then we're going to be in a recession. So President Trump is blaming former President Biden. So the first quarter, of course, it covers January, February, and March. So Trump is arguing that he came into office on January 20th, so that this is Biden's fault, not his. Now, in today's video, we're going to focus on 3 issues. So the first thing is, we're going to answer this. Is Trump or Biden responsible for this quarter's, Q1's negative GDP? And I'm going to give you a solid answer that you cannot argue with because I'm going to show you the facts. The second thing that we're going to address is the US economy expected to shrink even further in Q2 of this year, which is going to cover April, May, and June? And the third thing that I want to show you is that there's a twist about the Q1 GDP figures. I'm going to show you the reports. Okay, so first I want to show you President Trump blaming former President Biden. So please take a look.
Core GDP, and this is, you probably saw some numbers today. And I have to start off by saying that's Biden. That's not Trump, because we came in on January, this is the quarterly numbers. And we came in and I was very against everything that Biden was doing in terms of the economy, destroying our country.
Okay, so this negative GDP for Q1 of 2025, is this Biden's fault or is this Trump's fault? And fortunately, I'll tell you that, this is so clear cut, and I'm going to show you. So I want to show you what happens. So this shows GDP each quarter over the past 4 years. So for the past 2.5 years, it's been in the positive 2 to 3% range for the most part. And then all of a sudden, for January, February, and March of 2025, so we're talking about Q1 of 2025, it plunges to negative 0.3%. So I want to tell you who is at fault. Now, I'll tell you that it is President Trump that caused the negative GDP. And if you're a Trump supporter, I'm going to tell you that you're going to want to hear the twist to get the full picture. But anyways, Trump causing the negative GDP, it's so clear cut, and I'm going to show you why. It's going to come from the reports. So the GDP calculation, it's affected by imports. Now you have to listen to this very carefully. So imports do not lower GDP. However, imports do lower the GDP calculation. So it's confusing, I understand, but I'm going to explain this the best that I can. Okay, so here's how you calculate GDP. GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. So exports minus imports. Okay, so if you look at this equation, you would think, Brian, imports clearly are a subtraction and it reduces GDP. So I'll tell you that is not true, and I want to explain to you what is happening here. Okay, so I want to show it to you like this because this is the easiest way to see it. Within consumption, investment, and government spending, there are imports within these categories. So essentially, you need to subtract the imports out of these categories. So I want to give you an example. Okay, so you have to remember that GDP is a measure of how much a country produces. Okay, that's very important to know. So let's just say, we're going to look at the consumption part of the equation. So let's just say that in Q1 of 2025, you consumed soybeans, chicken, oil products, and an iPhone, okay? For a total of $3,000. Now, I'll ask you, which one of those products is imported and not produced in the USA? And it's going to be the iPhone for, let's just say, $1,000, okay? So if total consumption is listed at $3,000, then you have to subtract the $1,000 imported iPhone because it was not produced in the USA. So essentially, the imported iPhone, it shows up in consumption when it shouldn't be there to begin with. So that's why you have to subtract it out. And that's why you have to subtract the imports. Okay, so I just want you to think about it like this. You have to remember that GDP is a measure of how much a country produces, okay? So let's just say that you are producing chickens and you produce $1,500 worth of chickens. But let's just say that you imported iPhones, but who cares? Like, it's not going to affect your chickens. Like, you imported iPhones, but that doesn't change the fact that you produced $1,500 worth of chickens, right? Okay, so with that being said, then why are we seeing headlines like this? It basically says that imports lowered GDP. So you see, this is where it gets very confusing. Imports do not lower GDP, as I showed you in the equation and as I just explained it to you. However, imports lower the GDP calculation. So it's basically a distortion. So I'm going to show you. Okay, so I'm pulling this data straight from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So we go to page 10 of the report, and you're going to see this. And I know what you're thinking, Brian, I can't see anything. Okay, so let me zoom in to what's most important. Now, I want you to look at line 47, which I outlined in red. So compare the imports from Q4 of 2024 to Q1 of 2025. Imports on an annualized basis went up by 9.6%. So that's because companies were importing products like crazy in March to avoid the tariffs on April 2nd, which was Liberation Day. And again, Q1 covers January, February, and March. I mean, just take a look at this example. Look at how desperate Apple was. In March, Apple emergency airlifted over 1 million iPhones to avoid tariffs. So again, imports went up by 9.6%. So that takes us to page 7 of the GDP report. So let me zoom in to line 19. So here the report says that if imports went up by 9.6% over the past quarter, then if that rate continues for the rest of the year, then it's increasing at a rate of 38.4% for the year. So basically, you're just multiplying that by 4. However, if you add in the compounding, then they compute it, the increase in the rate to be 41.3%. And then based off imports increasing at a rate of 41.3%, this is how it affects GDP, which is on page 8 of the report. And it shows that imports lowered the GDP calculation by 5.03%. Or if you want to go at net exports, which is exports minus imports, then net exports reduced GDP by 4.83%. Now, I want you to think about that because that means that if it were not for the tariffs and the front loading of imports, then GDP would have been above positive 4%. So that's the twist. And I would say, isn't that just wild how the GDP calculation is computed? Wildly distorted is what I would say. So listen, I just walked you through the process. And to summarize, President Trump is clearly responsible for the negative 0.3% GDP. And that's driven by the surge of imports, driven by the tariffs. And that the GDP calculation, it's very distorted, as you can see. All right, so what does this mean for GDP for Q2 of 2025, which is April, May, and June? Because if imports were front-loaded into Q1, then what should we expect for Q2? So the expectation for this quarter, Q2, is that the imports, they're not going to be as high as they were in Q1. Therefore, we're not going to see the imports drag down GDP as much in Q2 as it did for Q1. So that's why the forecasters, as you can see, they're predicting that GDP is going to be in positive territory for the rest of the year, Q2, Q3, Q4. Because you have to remember that if it weren't for the surging imports, then GDP would have been well above positive 4%. Okay, now I want to show you this visualization so that you can see the biggest impacts to GDP for Q1. So you can see here that private investment, it gave a big boost to GDP for Q1. And you could see the impact of slower government spending. So it dragged down GDP, but as you can tell, it was by a smaller amount. And as we said, the imports, that's what really brought down GDP into negative territory. So is it possible that imports can drag down GDP this badly in Q2 again? I'd say that, yeah, it's possible. But again, it's expected that the bulk of the front loading of imports, it's already been done. But to update you on the situation, the reciprocal tariffs, they're paused until July 9th. So of course, how this develops is going to affect imports and exports, and it's going to consequently affect the GDP calculation. But just so you know, President Trump is already blaming a weak Q2 GDP on Biden. So please take a look.
This is a quarter that we looked at today. And we took all of us together. We came in on January 20th. So this is Biden. And you could even say the next quarter is sort of Biden because it doesn't just happen on a daily or an hourly basis. but we're turning it around. It's a big ship to turn around, and we're going to have the greatest country financially in the history of the world, I believe. I think we're going to do things and we had to do it. We reset the table.
But listen, to conclude, I want to tell you this. I want to be crystal clear about this. I'm not saying that like it's guaranteed that we're going to have a stellar Q2 GDP. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that for Q2, the import drag that we saw in Q1, it's not expected to occur again in Q2. That's all I'm saying. In terms of the technical recession, 2 negative quarters, 2 quarters of negative GDP. I mean, we'll see if that happens for 2025. You can let me know what you think, if that's going to happen or not. But I'll keep you updated on the situation. Please subscribe. I thank you for the support and wish you a very nice day. Take care.
That is the most thorough Q1 GDP analysis that I've been able to find, and I hope you found it helpful. And as he said, it's really going to be interesting to see how Q2 pans out. But even then, 2 points don't make a trend. We're going to need that third data point and ideally a fourth. It's going to take time, but that's really going to tell us if President Trump's administration's tariffs, trade deals, bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., et cetera, if that's really working or not. But nonetheless, I hope you found that analysis of Q1 GDP helpful. If so, give it a thumbs up. Want to see more like this, and certainly the updates that'll be coming. By all means, subscribe. And if you know anybody else that's interested in this topic, share it with them. As always, until next time, God bless. Love y'all.